Hi, my name's Bryna. They said I was just the quiet sister, someone good with spreadsheets, someone who wouldn't make a fuss. At my own sister's wedding, her new in-laws thought I was part of the catering team. They gave me a seat near the kitchen, called me the logistics girl, and thanked me like I was a silent staffer. And then, one guest said my name out loud, not as a footnote, but as the woman behind the funding that made the entire event possible. That's when the glass broke. And suddenly, every lie they'd built shattered with it. But here's the real question. Why did they erase me in the first place? The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 days later than everyone else's, apparently. It was buried beneath a stack of promotional coupons and a voter registration reminder, as if it, too, was trying not to be found. My heart sank before I even opened it. I held the envelope under the kitchen light, tilted slightly to the left, just to see if maybe I'd misread. But no, it was clear as day. Miss Brianna Quince, Brianna. Not Bryna, and certainly not Quinn. I read it again. Then, a third time. I even flipped it over to check if maybe there had been a typo only on the front. But no, it repeated itself inside. The place card enclosed matched the misspelled name exactly, written in loopy, artificial cursive. Brianna Quince. There was no note, no, so glad you're coming, no warmth. Just the generic print that looked like it had been spat out by a wedding planning software in autopilot mode. At first, I laughed. Quiet, dry, bitter. Then I sat down and stared at the table for longer than I want to admit. There's something about being misnamed that feels surgical. It's not loud, it doesn't bruise. But it cuts all the same. My fingers traced the edge of the card as I thought back. Birthday party lists, school trophies, job references. My name had been bent, broken, or forgotten so many times that it had stopped hurting. Or maybe I'd just gotten better at pretending it didn't. You'd think your own sister's wedding invite would get it right. But maybe I was never on the guest list to begin with. For a moment, I considered mailing a check, skipping the flight, and saving myself the discomfort. I imagined the gift table, shiny, wrapped boxes, and in the corner, mine. Anonymous, detached, forgotten. It would have been fitting. But then I heard my father's voice in my head. Not the loud one from his work calls or the bored one at Sunday dinners, but that rare, sober tone he used the night I left for college. Real families show up, even when they're forgotten. I booked the flight. I arrived in Charleston the day before the ceremony. The Langford estate stood like something out of a movie. Grand columns, too many hydrangeas, and waitstaff that moved like shadows. I gave my name at the gate. The woman flipped through her clipboard, frowning. You said, Quinn? Yes, Bryna Quinn. She scanned the list again, then looked up, smiling too quickly. You must be with catering, right? My lips parted, but no sound came out. It took 2 phone calls and a quiet conversation on a walkie-talkie before someone confirmed that, yes, I was indeed a guest. And no, I wasn't supposed to be on the family side. I was escorted to my table, tucked near the back of the reception tent, beside the kitchen entrance and 2 feet from a restroom door. The place card, because of course there was one, read, Ms. Brianna Quince, overflow seating. Of course. The man seated next to me was at least 70 and seemed to have confused me for a server. 3 times he asked for water. I got it for him the first time, just to avoid conversation. The second and third, I pretended I didn't hear. Around me, other guests unwrapped their welcome gifts, scented candles, monogrammed champagne flutes, small bottles of artisanal olive oil. My seat had a napkin. Not embroidered, just a napkin. I sat still, breathing slowly, watching Callista glide through the crowd like a debutante from a southern novel. Her smile was practiced, her steps deliberate. She laughed in bursts, held hands like she was posing for cameras. She was radiant. She was rehearsed. She was everything the Langfords probably hoped for in a daughter-in-law. A memory surfaced, us as kids, playing dress-up. She always insisted on being the bride. I didn't mind, really. Back then, it seemed harmless. But now I saw it for what it had always been. I remembered something I'd heard in a podcast just last week. Sometimes we don't grow apart. We were just never close to begin with. I didn't flinch. I didn't stand up or storm out. I sat still, eyes open, memory working like a film reel set to record. Let them smile. Let them forget me. Let them crop me out of every picture. I wasn't there to be seen. Not yet. As the string quartet began to tune, and the sun dipped behind the Langford estate, I shifted slightly to avoid the sunlight. But when I looked up, I realized I wasn't squinting at the sun. I was staring directly at the catering tent. The morning air was heavy with humidity as I stepped out of the car in front of the Langford estate. Dew clung to the tall grass, and the smell of manicured hedges hit me before the sight of the building did. I had chosen a plain black suit for the rehearsal brunch. Neutral, understated, appropriate. Apparently, too appropriate. I walked toward the back service gate, following a vague staff check-in sign someone had pointed me toward when I asked for the guest entrance. No one had offered clarity. A young woman with a headset scanned her clipboard and barely looked up. "Vendor or coordinator?" she asked. I blinked. "I'm a guest. Bryna Quinn." She flipped the pages, paused, then frowned. "Are you sure you're not with the event team?" Her tone wasn't rude, just mechanical, like I was a barcode she couldn't scan. "I'm sure." A moment passed. Another headset-wearing assistant jogged over, and after a brief, whispered exchange, I was waved through. "You can wait inside," the first one finally said, gesturing to a holding area already crowded with men in polos and women carrying garment bags. I took a seat in the corner and kept my mouth shut. Eventually, I found my way into the courtyard. The cocktail hour was already in full swing. Round tables under white umbrellas, servers passing mimosas, that awful soft jazz playing in the background. It was the kind of scene that looked airbrushed in wedding magazines. I spotted Callista near the center, encircled by guests like planets around the sun. I waited for her to notice me. She did. Her smile flickered for half a second, then came back, tighter this time. She stepped away from the group, heels clicking on the tile, and gave me a half hug, the kind you reserve for people you're not sure you want a photo with. "You made it," she said, her voice light but with an edge. "I wasn't sure you'd come after, everything." I gave her a blank look. "The invitation typo?" She laughed a little too loudly. "Oh God, don't be sensitive. It was the printer." And then, without missing a beat, she pulled me into the group. "Everyone, this is Bryna, my sister. She, works in shipping logistics or something like that." There was a brief pause. A few polite nods. Someone sipped their drink. Then the conversation resumed. Without me. I stood there, plastered smile, feet aching in my low heels, wondering when my identity had become a conversational afterthought. Maybe around the same time, they decided my name wasn't worth spelling right. A woman beside me turned, looking vaguely familiar, likely a cousin's friend or someone from high school. "So, how do you know the bride?" I took a breath. "She's my sister." Her eyebrows lifted. "Really? Wow, I had no idea. You're not in any of the photo reels or, the engagement page." She didn't mean harm. That was the worst part. It wasn't malicious, just a fact, casually observed and delivered. I had become so ghost-like, I thought. Even strangers assumed I was just a name left off. I excused myself from the circle and headed toward the edge of the patio. From a distance, I watched Callista glide from group to group. She was graceful, rehearsed, her voice rising just loud enough for strategic laughter. It was a performance, and she was the star of her own production. My mother's words echoed in my head, the ones she said once while folding laundry. "Callista shines. You, steady the ship. Quiet isn't always visible, sweetheart." It used to comfort me. Back when I thought being essential was the same as being loved. Now, it just sounded like a euphemism for staying out of the way. I watched Callista link arms with a new guest, throw her head back in laughter, and smile like nothing in the world had ever bruised her. She didn't look back at me, not even once. As the sun dipped behind the marshes and the cocktail hour thinned into quieter conversations and softer light, I caught her gaze from across the courtyard. This time, she didn't smile. The rehearsal dinner was held in one of those windowless ballrooms that tried too hard to be elegant. Chandeliers too bright, tablecloths too stiff, waitstaff dressed better than half the guests. I slipped in through a side entrance, unnoticed, which had become something of a theme. Every seat seemed taken, every group already in motion. I weaved my way around servers, holding trays of deviled eggs and pimento cheese tarts, eventually landing in a seat near the audiovisual setup. No one asked me to move. No one offered small talk. I became part of the backdrop, like a lamp in the corner no one remembered turning on. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd, that performative reverence people give when they expect nostalgia to wash over them. The screen blinked to life. Callista and Everett stood at the front, holding hands like royalty, smiling too hard. The first slide flickered on. Baby Callista in a white bonnet. Her first steps. Kindergarten. Then came the early adolescence photos. School plays, dance recitals, summer camps. Each one carefully chosen. Callista always in the center, glowing. Her world, curated. I waited for mine. 10 minutes in, it showed up. There I was, in what used to be a photo of both of us on a carousel in Myrtle Beach. Only now, the angle was cropped tight. The girl next to Callista wasn't me. It was Megan Bell, her high school best friend. Her arm held out where mine used to be. The caption read, Callista and her childhood sister, Megan. I didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. I remembered that day vividly. I wore a blue scrunchie. I'd begged to ride that carousel twice. I'd bought us cotton candy with my own allowance. I still had the ticket stub somewhere in a box back home. And yet, there she was. Megan, wearing my necklace. A tiny seashell pendant I hadn't seen in over a decade. It wasn't forgotten. It was rewritten. Someone had to open that photo. Zoom in, cut me out. Save over the original. Retype the caption. That wasn't neglect. That was precision. The audience chuckled at a toddler picture. One woman cooed at Callista's prom dress. Her mother wiped away a tear at a shot of Callista hugging Megan by a Christmas tree. I sat perfectly still. Toni Morrison once wrote, "Definitions belong to the definers, not the defined." And in that moment, I saw what they were doing. They weren't just editing me out. They were defining a version of Callista that never included me. The applause that followed each slide felt like a slow betrayal. I wasn't just a missing face. I was an intentional absence, a deleted thread from a carefully woven tapestry. I scanned the room. My mother clutched a napkin to her chest. Everett nodded along like the campaign manager of his own daughter's biography. Guests smiled, leaned into one another, whispered memories that had nothing to do with me. I didn't stand. I didn't confront. I didn't ruin the moment they had designed. But I noticed. Every beat of it. My name wasn't forgotten. It was erased. I looked back at the screen one final time, not to find myself, but to confirm I hadn't imagined it. The necklace was unmistakable. I remembered the way the shell used to catch the light. My light. Around the neck of the girl they now called Callista's only sister. I didn't storm out. I didn't cry. I just reached for a cocktail napkin and began writing. Not a complaint, not a confrontation, just a note to myself. They cropped me out. So I'm going to write the frame. The sky had started to shift into that low country pink, hazy and humid, the way Charleston does early evenings in June. We had moved out of the ballroom and onto the garden lawn. Fairy lights blinked over trimmed hedges, and champagne flutes clicked like polite applause. I stood near the edge of the bar area, a sweating glass of seltzer in my hand. No one approached me. No one avoided me, either. It was the kind of strategic indifference Southern families master. Make it seem like you're included by never saying out loud that you're not. A woman with perfectly sprayed hair and an accent that held just enough old money, Twang turned toward a younger guest. Now that's a daughter you can brag about. MBA from Wharton, Goldman Sachs, just bought her parents a vacation home in Naples. Not many kids think of their family like that anymore. She didn't glance my way. She didn't have to. I was 2 feet away. The delivery was surgical. Callista had re-entered her circle of admirers, arm in arm with her new mother-in-law. Laughter bubbled up around her like champagne fizz. I watched, waiting for her to catch my eye. She didn't. I made my way toward her anyway. Not because I wanted a scene. God knows I've spent most of my life avoiding those, but because I needed her to see me, to know I saw her. She turned as I approached, that frozen yet glowing bride look pinned in place. "Hey," I said quietly, "can I talk to you for a second?" Her smile didn't fade, just froze. "Of course. Walk with me?" We moved toward the edge of the lawn, near the white trellis where the string quartet was packing up. I didn't waste time. "The slideshow," I said. "Was that photo edited?" She exhaled, clearly rehearsing her answer. "Brina, it's just a video. People don't notice those things. Don't make it a big deal. Not tonight." I stared at her. She looked away. "Does it really matter?" And that was it. Not an argument, not a scream, but it rang louder than any fight we'd ever had. That sentence, flat, dismissive, tactical, was a door closing in slow motion. I nodded. That's what I needed to know. Callista gave a soft laugh. "You've always taken things so seriously." I didn't reply. She turned and floated back into the crowd, sliding effortlessly into her role. Hand on Everett's arm, smile wide. Applause again, for some half-toast or small joke I didn't catch. The wedding machine kept spinning. I stayed behind, steps away from the trellis, watching. A woman near the gift table leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Didn't she say she was an only child?" And there it was, the strategy in action. This wasn't just about leaving me out. This was about making the absence look intentional. Elegantly, politely natural. Not a mistake, a brand. I walked deeper into the garden, past the edge of the manicured light. Fireflies blinked in the shadows. I found an empty bench near the archway and sat down. I remembered something my old mentor told me when I first negotiated my own contracts. You don't need to scream. All you need is the right silence, at the right time. This was that time. I pulled out my phone, not to post, not to record, but to make a few notes, not just about the slideshow, but the table placements, the vendor list, the casual misquotes, the last-minute RSVP email I never got. They thought I was quiet because I had nothing to say. But quiet isn't empty. It's patient. It's storing. It's building. And while they toasted the perfect bride and edited sisterhood into a fairy tale, I was making a different kind of list, one that doesn't fit into a frame. The next morning began deceptively gentle. Warm sun filtered through linen curtains. Birds chirped from oaks that lined the Langford estate. A breakfast buffet was set up outside on the veranda. Linen-covered tables dotted the lawn, and servers offered sparkling peach water to guests as they filtered in. It looked serene, Southern hospitality at its glossiest. I arrived 10 minutes early, hoping to slide in quietly and find a corner to exist in. The hostess didn't greet me by name. She simply waved vaguely toward the outermost table, tucked near the emergency exit, half in shade, half in sun. A chair scraped against concrete as I pulled it out. My name card was folded crooked, again misspelled. Brianna. I didn't bother correcting it. The table filled slowly with distant relatives, 2 logistics vendors, and a woman who used to babysit Callista. Conversation rolled past me like I wasn't there. Then Everett stood. His voice had that polished resonance of a man used to being heard without question. He held a flute of orange juice and cleared his throat. Everyone instinctively hushed. "I just want to thank everyone here this morning," he began, "especially those who've contributed to this incredible journey Callista and Andrew are starting together." Smiles all around. Nods. Agreement. I could have drawn it blindfolded. I especially want to acknowledge the Langford Trust, whose support helped secure their beautiful condo in Atlanta's Beltline district, right across from Piedmont Park. Prime location, long-term growth, a smart investment in every sense. He raised his glass. Applause followed. I didn't clap. Because I knew that property. I knew it like my own breath. I had structured that acquisition myself, quietly, under a private LLC that fed into a redevelopment partnership run by my company. My firm had secured the deal under Langford's shell brand, but the financial design, the negotiation, the closing strategy, that had my fingerprints all over it. They were standing inside a home I built, and pretending the foundation belonged to someone else. I kept my face still, but a storm had already started in my spine. As the clinking and murmurs resumed, I stood and walked toward the hallway. The air conditioning blasted through the corridor, snapping me back to attention. I wasn't sure what made me turn around, but when I did, Callista was behind me. She didn't flinch, just tilted her head like a curious stranger. "Did you know that condo was my project?" I asked, my voice low but crisp. She blinked, then smiled, a PR smile. "You helped, didn't you?" But Everett's firm handled the closing. It was his vision, my spreadsheet template, my timeline, my numbers. I didn't raise my voice. She shrugged, glossy and unmoved. "It's not a competition, Bryna. People just want to feel good today." I stared at her, not angry, just awake. That's when it became clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was design. My work had been rerouted, white-labeled, and now paraded like it came from someone else's brilliance. Theft, camouflaged by civility. I took a deep breath and stepped back. "This is the last family event I attend where I haven't signed the narrative first," I said evenly. She opened her mouth, but I was already walking away. Behind me, the brunch resumed, glasses tinkling, soft jazz humming, the kind of celebration where silence wears heels and smiles are currency. I sat at a table near the hedges, pulled out my notebook, and wrote a single line beneath the list of assets my firm had backed over the last 5 years. No more silent equity. They could build their empire on my blueprints if they wanted, but they were going to learn exactly what it felt like to lean on a spine made of steel and mistake it for a doormat. The reception tent shimmered like a scene from a Southern bridal catalog, draped in white linen, strings of warm lights looping overhead, the scent of roses and overpriced perfume clinging to every fabric. I arrived alone, no surprise there. A clipboard girl in ballet flats waved me in without checking my name. Not that she would have found it correctly printed anyway. At the seating chart, I scanned the ornate board, already knowing it would be wrong. And there it was, again. Ms. Brianna Quinn, vendor table. Vendor, not guest, not family. Just another cog in the well-oiled event machine. I followed the little chalkboard arrow pointing toward the far left corner, where the DJ booth hummed faintly and catering trays clattered from behind a curtain. The table was wedged between a sound technician fiddling with wireless packs and a woman in black slacks wiping frosting from her sleeve. My name card sat folded awkwardly, already wilting in the humidity. No favors, no programs, no seat cushion, just one mismatched chair and a view of the staff door. I slid into the seat without expression. My suit, a tailored, quiet black, had once made me feel confident. Here, it only reinforced the assumption. A teenager in a server's vest leaned over with a nervous smile. "Hey, sorry, are you the supervisor for the West Buffet line? We're short on dessert plates." I looked at him. For a split second, I wanted to laugh, but it wasn't funny. "No," I said simply, "but I hope you find them." He blinked, then nodded, and disappeared into the kitchen bustle. I glanced down at myself, then toward the other guests, family seated near the dance floor, flower arrangements piled high like centerpieces to their own importance. They were polished, curated, pristine. Me? I was camouflaged, and I knew exactly why. They couldn't picture me anywhere else. And that said more about them than it ever did about me. I sat quietly through the first dance, through the salad course, through the 10-minute speech from Everett Langford about vision, family, and legacy. Then came the toast. He stood again, glass raised high, voice still syrupy smooth. And of course, he said, with that gracious nod he reserved for anyone beneath him, to all the hard-working staff, especially those working quietly behind the scenes, thank you for keeping everything flowing smoothly. He looked across the room, eyes passing directly over me, not through, over. Like I was part of the lighting rig, something to glance past without thought. Someone at the vendor table clapped. The sound technician let out a low whistle. I didn't move. They'd rewritten me into the background, and now they were thanking me for staying there. I chewed my bite of cold asparagus and let the applause fade. Inside, I wasn't quiet. I was calculating. I began mentally walking through my spreadsheets. Every dollar of asset leverage, every silent partnership, every non-voting stake that gave me veto power without drawing a headline. My phone buzzed against my leg. A calendar reminder. Merger finalization, Monday, 9 a.m. I opened my messages, typed a quick note to my assistant. Reschedule Monday. Push the merger announcement 48 hours. I'll handle it myself. I didn't know yet how I would do it, but I knew I would. They thought I was background support. What they'd forgotten was that background holds up the whole damn structure. The afternoon sun had mellowed, casting a warm, amber hue across the estate lawn. Somewhere in the distance, a saxophonist played a jazzy instrumental near the rose archway, trying to sound casual, but clearly staged for ambiance. I was walking toward the main house to grab a water, when a planner with a clipboard stopped me with a strained smile. Ms. Quinn, they're doing the formal family portraits now. You're needed near the fountain. For a flicker of a moment, I believed her. Believed that someone, maybe my mother or Callista, had remembered I was family. That someone had said, make sure Brina is in the picture. I followed the gravel path back toward the open green where the main family had gathered around the marble fountain. A white backdrop stood beside them, and a photographer with a $1,000 lens was already giving poses. Callista stood at the center, radiant, a hand resting lightly on Everett's arm. The Langfords were posed like campaign royalty, gracious, confident, symmetrical. I waited on the edge, unsure of where I was supposed to stand, when a young assistant in flats came up behind me and tapped my arm. Sorry, she whispered, glancing around. This set is for immediate family only. We'll do another one after, okay? I didn't argue. I didn't even nod. I just stepped back. And no one, not a single person, looked up to ask why I wasn't in the frame. The camera clicked. Flash. Click. Again. A joke made by someone in the front row. Laughter followed, shoulders relaxed. Even Everett let his lips curl slightly. That's when I saw it. Callista leaning subtly toward the photographer, saying something low. Her manicured hand gestured toward the crowd. The photographer nodded. Adjusted his frame. I'd sent Callista a message the week before. Let me know if you need help with anything last minute, I'd written. It had been read. Never answered. Click. Flash. Another perfect version of the family they wanted. I stood in the background, a literal blur in the lens, not even worth the shadow. One of the guests standing nearby, sipping a mimosa, turned and said casually to her partner, I thought Callista said she was an only child. He shrugged. I think she is. I didn't correct them. I didn't correct anyone anymore. Instead, I stood still and watched the whole thing unfold, the way I'd watched birthdays pass with no call, holidays with invitations that arrived after the RSVP deadline. This wasn't new. This was tradition. But I had changed. This time, I didn't fold inward. I didn't disappear into myself. I observed. I recorded. I remembered. A woman in a champagne dress whispered something to Callista. They both laughed. The photo session continued. They had always prided themselves on presentation, on images, on narrative. But this was erasure as etiquette, rewriting reality through posed smiles and intentional omissions. I pulled my phone from my clutch and opened my notes app. Under a bullet point labeled Visual Manipulation, I typed, "Family photo, excluded with intent, witnessed by 6 people, no second round." They had made it clear I didn't fit their frame, so I'd stop trying to stand in it. As the final click rang out and everyone started to disperse, I stood just beyond the edge of the crowd, still, straight, steady. They posed for the picture they wanted, and I took note of every pixel they deleted. The reception had hit that lull between the last bite of cake and the start of tipsy dancing, when shoes come off under tables and toasts grow bolder by the glass. I sat at the far end of the room, just close enough to hear the speeches, but far enough to be forgotten by the camera angles. My chair was angled slightly off-center, tucked behind a floral arrangement that blocked any clear view of the stage. That suited me fine. At that point, I wasn't looking to be seen. I was just there to observe how much more of myself they'd pretend didn't exist. The MC tapped his mic twice, clearing his throat. "We're moving into open tributes now," he said, cheerful as a weather anchor. "If anyone would like to share a few words about the lovely couple, now's the time." Silence stretched, then a voice I hadn't expected. "Yeah, I'll say something," came from a table near the head. Harlan Voss. I turned. Harlan was an old industry acquaintance. Logistics veteran, known for keeping calm during port strikes and mergers alike. I hadn't seen him in years. He stood, wine glass in hand, easy smile on his face. "I've known Andrew's family for a decade," he began. "But funny enough, I know one of you even longer. A woman whose strategies saved our Baltic deal back in 14, when we were hanging on by a spreadsheet and a prayer." Polite laughter, mostly from the vendor tables. "And honestly," he continued, eyes scanning the room, "none of this tonight, this merger of families, these business expansions, would have been possible without Brenna Quinn. Where are you, Brenna?" The room paused. I felt every spine straighten, every head pivot in my direction. My pulse didn't spike. I didn't blush. I simply folded my napkin and placed it on the table. Then it happened. A sharp crack of glass. Everett Langford, standing 2 feet from the mic, had dropped his wine goblet. The stem snapped. Red wine bled into the white linen like a wound spreading fast. He didn't flinch, didn't bend down, just stared. Callista whispered something to Andrew, her new husband, who looked from her to Everett to me, confused, like someone realizing the game had shifted and they missed the cue. I stood. Not quickly, not dramatically, just deliberately. Harlan gave a slight nod, proud and oblivious. I didn't smile, didn't wave. I didn't need the mic. "That name," I said, my voice quiet but caring. "You've all known it. You just didn't care to ask who it belonged to." Silence, sharp as the stem Everett had shattered. I sat back down. Across the room, murmurs started, quiet, almost respectful. "That's the Quinn in BQ Maritime?" someone asked. "Is she part of the Capital round?" another whispered. At the head table, board members were already checking their phones, trying not to look like they were searching LinkedIn. I sipped from my water. Cool, still, entirely in control. It wasn't shock that filled the room. It was shame disguised as surprise. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd ignored me on purpose. But now, they had to wear the name they buried on every contract, every deal, every whispered rumor that began with, "Did you know?" No one moved to toast again. No one dared pick up the mic. They knew better now. The room didn't breathe. It hovered, suspended in the kind of stunned quiet you only hear after an alarm stops blaring. My name had landed like a dropped vase. Everyone heard it, and no one dared to touch the shards. I sat still, aware of every head now turned toward me, every whisper curling through the air like cigarette smoke. Across the room, I could hear my name spoken again and again, passed like a rumor at a funeral. Some said it with curiosity, some with confusion, a few with panic. Bryna Quinn. They all knew it now. They just didn't know what to do with it. The master of ceremonies stepped back up, clearly uncomfortable. A folded card had found its way into his hand. Someone had slipped him the truth, while everyone else was still catching up. He cleared his throat, eyes darting across the silent crowd. And, before we continue, he said, trying for poise and failing, we'd like to give special thanks to one of our key supporters for today's celebration. Pause. 1 beat. 2. BQ Maritime Solutions, whose resources and expertise made tonight's event logistically seamless. Founded by Ms. Bryna Quinn. He didn't look at me. No one did. A handful of guests clapped weakly, as if not applauding might be a social risk they couldn't calculate. The rest blinked, processing who I was, what I meant, and more importantly, what they'd missed. Everett remained seated, unmoving, jaw flexing once under skin stretched too tight. I knew that look, not rage, not shame, calculation. After a long pause, he stood. He made the walk slowly, composed like a man used to winning, even after losing. He approached my table, the clapping long faded, replaced by that eerie buzz of secondhand embarrassment. I wish someone had told me you'd be here, he said, voice smooth but strained. We could have planned something more official. I met his gaze. You knew, I said flatly. You just didn't check the cap table. He gave a tight-lipped smile, polished, practiced, pointless, and walked back toward the head table like a man leaving a crime scene he couldn't cover up. I noticed the investors first. 2 men whispering into their phones. 1 woman scrolling frantically through a tablet. I caught a glimpse of a message thread open on someone's screen. BQ owns 28%. Since when? They were learning, and not fast enough. The man who once erased me was now seated beside people, scrambling to figure out how deep my influence ran. They didn't need an announcement. They just needed numbers, and I had them. I adjusted my cuff, not for show, but because it felt right. That small movement was all the acknowledgement I needed. Not applause, not regret, just attention, finally earned, now unavoidable. I stood slowly and walked toward the back of the room. No one stopped me. No one followed. The spotlight had shifted, but it had done so without fanfare, without demand. I hadn't asked for it. I hadn't begged for recognition. I had built it, quietly. And now, they sat inside the shell of what they thought they owned, only to discover my name was etched on the foundation. As I reached the doors, I paused for one last glance. They weren't embarrassed about how they treated me. They were embarrassed they hadn't known who I was. And that was louder than anything I could have said into a mic. The air in the Langford estate shifted after my name was spoken. Not abruptly, nothing here ever was, but like the pressure change before a storm. You didn't feel it until your ears popped. I had already stepped off the main floor, finding refuge in the corridor behind the ballroom, where the catering carts lined up like soldiers. The clink of glasses, low laughter, and fake joy continued behind me, muffled by heavy drapes and distance. But my name, it followed. Inside the head table circle, the noise had dropped. A few were huddled together, brows furrowed, fingers scrolling. One of the junior board members held a crumpled copy of the shareholder chart in hand, whispering to Everett in sharp staccato. BQ Maritime Solutions, 28.5%, I overheard. It's here. She's been here the whole time. I didn't need to stay to see the rest. I knew the expression Everett would wear. The polite nod, the tightly drawn lips, the silent scream he'd never let surface in front of a crowd. What I didn't expect was what came next. He found me. Not with haste, he wasn't foolish, but with that performative calm men like him wear like cufflinks. Bryna, he said softly, I wish someone had told me you'd be here. We could have planned something more official. I let the silence stretch, then smiled without warmth. You knew, I said. You just didn't check the cap table. He hesitated, then gave a tight chuckle. Let's not make this about legacy. Families survive because we look forward, not back. I nodded once. No, Everett. Families survive when they stop erasing people and calling it tradition. His jaw tightened. I stepped past him, toward the outdoor terrace where new guests were gathering. From a distance, I saw the monitors flickering, playing the same curated slideshow Callista had paraded the night before. And again, I wasn't in them. Not a single frame. Not even the cropped one. Guests whispered. A few tilted their heads, puzzled. Isn't she the sponsor? Someone muttered behind me. A couple shrugged. A few pretended not to have heard at all. Callista posed beside her new mother-in-law, both looking like porcelain dolls in matching blush. I watched from the edge, hands folded. I didn't need them to see me anymore. I had already signed the next phase. Back in the estate office, I took out the envelope I'd been carrying all day. Inside, a formal board notice, typed, signed, sealed. Subject line, Operational Realignment, Langford Freight Holdings. The meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks from that date. Agenda, review of voting rights, equity restructuring, internal audit findings. I slipped it onto Everett's leather chair. Next to it, I left the folded apology speech he had drafted but never read. And on the back, in neat handwriting, I added a sticky note. Next time, read the footer. My initials were signed cleanly below. BQ. I closed the door behind me. They had cropped me out of their photos, but they forgot who signed the check for the photographer. By the time I reached my hotel, the sky had turned indigo, bleeding into the ocean horizon like bruised silk. I slipped off my heels at the door, without turning on a light, letting the city hum fill the silence. Somewhere across the harbor, fireworks from another celebration cracked and bloomed, their reflection dancing on the window. But I wasn't watching for spectacle. I was listening for something quieter. The stillness I'd earned. My dress still clung to my back, stiff with the day's sweat and restraint. I poured a glass of water and stepped out onto the balcony. Below, Charleston moved on like it always had. Horses clopped down cobblestone. Fairy lights blinked like Morse code from the marina. A siren sang somewhere distant. And inside me, finally, nothing stirred. I didn't replay every insult. I didn't need to. It wasn't about what they had done anymore. It was about what I had let them get away with. I wasn't angry. Not really. Just done. They called me a guest. They forgot I was the foundation beneath their feet. For a long time, I had waited for recognition, for someone to acknowledge the years I carried what they couldn't. And now that they knew, I realized something even heavier than resentment. I didn't need them to. My phone buzzed on the side table. One new message, from Callista. I didn't know you'd made it this far. I wish you'd told me. No punctuation, no apology. Just that sterile, passive phrasing. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I'm proud of you. Not even, thank you. Just, I didn't know. I stared at it for a long time, then set the phone down, screen still glowing. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the drawer beside the bed and pulled out a hotel notepad. I started writing. Not a response, not a letter to anyone specific. Just a release. To the girl who once stood behind every family photo, I see you now. I know what it cost you to stay silent. I know what it took to stop asking to be let in. I know how loud the world can feel when you choose to walk away from it. I signed it. From the one you edited out. And then, I folded it once, placed it under my water glass, and walked away. At dawn, I dressed in jeans, packed my things, and headed downstairs to check out. The lobby smelled of fresh lemons and tired air conditioning. As I handed over the key card, I pulled out my phone and typed a message to my assistant. Let's schedule that leadership retreat. I want women like me at the table. Not near it, not behind it, at it. As the car pulled away from the hotel, I didn't look back. The Langfords could keep their edited albums, their framed fictions, their photo-perfect myths. They'd already taught me everything I needed to know about visibility and erasure. The world outside hadn't changed, but I had. I never needed to be in their frame. I was always building my own. 1 week later, I walked into a glass-walled boardroom overlooking Manhattan. The skyline was soaked in morning haze, steel and sunlight stretching far beyond the negotiation table. 10 chairs were filled. Legal, finance, operations. All present, all still. I took the head seat. No need to announce who I was. In front of me sat a small linen pouch. Inside it, the embroidered napkin from the wedding reception. Brina Q? Stitched in gold? Misspelled? Of course. I laid it gently next to my leather folder. Let it sit in plain view. No one asked about it. Let's begin, I said, flipping open the folder. Effective immediately, Langford Freight Holdings is undergoing a strategic realignment. I slid copies of the reorganization packet across the table, watching hands move faster than expressions. Someone cleared their throat. A man on the legal team shifted in his chair. Everett's name appeared near the bottom of a summary clause labeled Authority Redistribution. One of the assistants, bright, nervous, new, scanned the document, eyes darting. Her lips parted. Wait, this grants BQ Maritime Solutions controlling influence over 28.5%, I finished. Rounded, but yes. With cross-affiliate voting power and silent partnerships accounted for, our seat is no longer optional, it's central. She blinked. No one spoke. I didn't need applause. I didn't even need acknowledgement. This was the echo of power you build in silence. Not the kind that brags, but the kind that builds the floor they stand on. Outside the conference room, a small press gathering waited at the building entrance. I stepped into the marble lobby, nodded to the security guard who held the door, and stood behind the mic without preamble. I won't take questions, I began. This is not a moment of drama. It's correction. Some legacies are earned in public. Others are erased behind closed doors. I've chosen not to be the latter. The cameras clicked. No one looked away. I turned and left before they could ask about Langford, or Everett, or the board. I'd given them what they needed. Let them run the story their way. I was too busy writing the next one. That evening, a small parcel arrived at Callista's newly listed address in Buckhead. No return label. Inside was a silver frame, empty. Beneath it, the same embroidered napkin she had commissioned for the wedding. Name still wrong. Tucked behind it, a handwritten card. You can crop the image, but you'll never edit who paid for the lens. No signature. She would know. I returned to my apartment just after 9. Midtown buzzed outside my window, but I didn't notice. I was reviewing a sponsorship proposal for an initiative designed to fund women who had been erased from their family businesses. The tagline read, "You weren't overlooked, you were outgrown." I signed it, not with initials, with my full name. They had written a story without me. But the next chapter, I wasn't just in it. I owned the copyright.